So our last presenter is Steph, and is presenting describing data for discovery, RSEs, Croissant, and the future research metadata. So welcome.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sreeparna. I'm a research software engineer at URL. We are a pretty new team. We were formally operating starting last year, with the beginning of last year, but right now we are 14 RSEs, and we work with academics and researchers mostly at the computer science department at URL. So today I'm going to talk to you about something seemingly simple. I'm talking about data set metadata, describing data sets. And I'll also describe how I used a new Python library called Croissant to do that. Right. It all started with me getting a project that required a better way of sharing a collection of data sets, like bookmarks of data sets, for the lack of a better word. And what we started with was a document of more than hundreds of dataset links, but they wanted to import it into a data platform. And the only way to do it at that moment was to actually copy paste all the links into the data platform. So while going through all the data repositories that were there in the Word document, I observed that people describe the layouts of their data sets in unique ways. It is not trivial, especially when it comes to data sets that have different data modality. It's not trivial to combine data sets. So, like I was saying, combining data sets, especially with different modalities, is not trivial at all. And while the document that I was given, it had the metadata in it, right? It had the links to the data repositories. It had the author list. But at the same time, I couldn't use that metadata to programmatically do anything with it. And also, we end up doing a lot of rework by writing custom loaders for every data set we come across in machine learning pipelines. So what is the bottleneck here, right? Looking at the friction points that I described in the last slide, in my opinion, we are talking about inconsistency in the metadata, because it is there, but it's not consistent. Everybody describes data sets in a different way. And if I had to spell it out, what we have right now, we do have vocabularies that describe data sets, but they tell us where the data lives, who has authored it, the licenses it's under, but that's about it. It doesn't tell us how to load data sets, interpret it. So what we need is a consistent way of doing this that also helps us understand what's in the data sets. Okay, this is where Croissant comes in. It's a library developed by the ML Commons initiative. So it's a community-driven initiative to implement vocabulary for data sets that prepares it for downstream tasks, right? Okay. What stood out to me when I was looking at ways to implement the metadata standard for our project, what stood out to me about Croissant was that it sort of lets you decide what part of the solution you want to use. So it's like a layered solution. They have 4 different layers in which you can, so basically at different depths with which you can describe your data set. So you can make the decision how much is worth it for you and how much is an unnecessary overhead. Another thing, Croissant is based off of schema.org, which is a widely used standard to describe data sets currently on the web. So it's interoperable with the current systems It's not gonna break. So basically, it's just an addition on top of the existing standards. We are going to go through each of the layers one by one. So the metadata layer, essentially, this is the only layer that's mandatory when you're using Croissant to describe your data set. You need to so as you can see in the slides, this layer describes where the data set lives. So basically all the conventional metadata fields. It tells us how to cite the data set, yeah, and also the licenses and a bit of a description of the data set. Then we go to the resource layer, so that's one level deeper. You know where the data lives, but now we want to know what's inside the folders, right? The actual artifacts, the name and the file types and all that. And this layer is optional. So if you don't want to use this, you can just stay at the metadata layer and still use the Croissant format to describe your data set. And this is another level deeper. So now you know what artifacts are there in a folder in a data set, but you want to know what's there inside each file. So this is a dummy example that I made for this presentation. So it's just a CSV file. And using this layer of Croissant, you can sort of go further and explain what each field means in a data set and what's the source of that field from the CSV file that you have. Yeah, I've personally found this layer very important when I'm trying to load a data set out of the box. Okay, in general, how does Croissant help? I've found that by having a consistent way of describing data sets, it also helps. It's kind of like a backward incentive because it's integrated with, so Google Data Search also supports Croissant. So if you have your data set described in the Croissant format, then it's easier to discover your data sets as well when you're looking for data sets across the internet. Then another interesting thing is, although they published their work just about a year ago, major data repositories like Hugging Face, Kaggle, also OpenML, they have all integrated with Croissant. So you can get out of the box Croissant files for any data set that you find in these repositories. And combined, they have around 400,000, if I'm not wrong, data sets between them. So when you expose data sets through a common standard, you sort of enable plugging in data sets in different parts of the pipeline and just use it from the go. Okay, now coming back to my use case, so the project for which I came across Croissant, what it helped us do is go from this Word document, 20-page Word document, having links to all these Synod of sites and project pages, etc., which required me to sort of manually go through them. So I do have to do the work once. But from then on, I have a list of Croissant files, which are JSON files that I generated programmatically, and then I can have a one-click import of all the data set bookmarks in the data platform that they were building for the project. And yeah, like one takeaway for me was that it makes the entire process reusable. If you okay, so for someone who wants to use this in their workflow, what does it mean? So you could look at it as a consumer or as a person who authors the data set or shares it. So for my case, I used the Python library to describe the data set first. This was a little tricky for me because the data set, the library is not as good as, does not have as much documentation, but at the same time, the community is very active. I was able to get support. I raised an issue for whatever I was struggling with, and we sort of sat together to understand how I could use it to create the JSON files for the first time. So yeah, you create the JSON file, you validate it, and then you basically have a list of JSON files that you can share. Or you could, if you are hosting the data sets yourself, you in a web page, then you can have the JSON file embedded into your HTML page, essentially. Yeah. And others can then automatically load it when they go to your web page. Yeah, that's about it. Thank you for staying and listening to my talk.
Thank you, Deb, for your presentation. Very good. So let's have some question if there is. Okay. So the first question is, Deb, does Croissant support HTF5?
In what sense? Can someone clarify? So by what do you mean by support? So it's like, so the vocabulary that it uses, it's based off of schema.org, right? So if schema.org supports something, then Croissant will inherently support it, because it's basically just an addition that's sitting on top of schema.org/dataset.
Fine. Okay, next question is, does Croissant also support image dataset?
Yeah, so that's actually an interesting, that's a good question, because one of the motivating factors for using Croissant is also so that the modality shouldn't matter. You just give a link to wherever your image data set lives, and that's that. You go from there. Yeah, of course, but if this question is more from the perspective of if you can load image data, I haven't tried it out myself. I've mostly worked with JSON LD datasets and textual datasets, but I'm pretty sure it should be possible.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, has there been any adoption of Croissant for non-ML data, such as geospatial datasets?
There are fields. So I know for a fact that because the project was also about data sets in the energy domain, so they basically have fields that describe latitudes and longitudes. So they do have fields to support geospatial data sets, but yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Okay, there is another question. What sort of software or tool can you automatically load dataset into once you have made the Croissant metadata file?
Right. So once you have the JSON file, ML Croissant is a Python library, and then they have exposed some data loaders. Again, it's I would give a disclaimer that the documentation is not as robust yet. But yeah, the idea is that you use the ML Croissant Python library to load the data sets as well, once you have the Croissant JSON file defined.
Okay. Thank you, Deb. There is no more question. We really appreciate your time, effort, and valuable contribution.
Thank you.
Please applaud her.
Thank you for listening.